Well, we are ready to begin. Welcome, everyone, to today's local government education program. This is the second in a five-part series on rural business transitions, brought to you through the collaboration of Rural Partners, the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs, and University of Illinois Extension. Today's program is entitled The Evolution of Succession Planning: Strengths, Shortfalls, and Innovative Pathways Forward. My name is Mike Delaney, and I'm an Extension Community and Economic Development Educator based up here in the Northern State Line region. We're going to begin with some quick housekeeping notes. Please note that if you desire, you can activate today's Zoom closed captioning function at the bottom of your screen. We will be recording today's webinar, and we'll be making it available on our Community and Economic Development YouTube channel. So, after the conclusion of today's presentation, registered participants will receive an email with a link to the recording and related materials. So if you didn't register in advance for the webinar and would like to receive the materials, that's fine, but do be sure to please put your email in the chat box to let us know. As always, you're welcome at any time to share your questions in the Zoom chat space. We'll review the questions in a Q&A session following the main presentation. Now I'm going to introduce Kelly Jo McFarland, who serves as a member of the board of Rural Partners, as well as Director of Community Development for the village of Monticello, Illinois. Kelly?
Thank you, Mike. Just to give a little blurb on Rural Partners, we are a nonpartisan, member-driven, nonprofit organization established in 1989 with the mission to maximize and potentially promote the potential of rural Illinois through collaboration, advocacy, and connection of the communities and the resources available to them. So in short, we know the things or know who knows the things, and then try and make those networks mesh together. Norm Walzer, who was has been a Rural Partners board member since it started, is Professor Emeritus and Founding Director of the Illinois Institute of Rural Affairs, and his research interests focus mainly on the rural development issues. Norm, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly Jo. And we want to thank the Institute for Rural Affairs, Rural Partners, and Extension for hosting these events. We also thank Mike Delaney from University Extension for organizing and managing the session. It's been really a pleasure to work with him. Some of the material presented today is also included in a book recently published, Retaining and Transitioning Businesses in Communities. Chris Merritt and I edited it, and it's available from Rutledge. In our previous webinar, Tessa Conroy from the University of Wisconsin discussed population trends indicating that an aging of business owners, especially in small towns, will lead to a loss of some essential services unless these businesses continue when the current owners retire. National surveys suggest that many residents would prefer to live in rural areas and towns, and their preferences, though, are based on a number of different things, including the ability to buy essential goods and services, and opportunities to engage in community activities, social capital. And this often includes meeting in grocery stores, restaurants, gathering places. There are often sole proprietorships with elderly owners. This means then that if these businesses don't continue, then we will have some negative effects on the livability in the small towns. A transfer of ownership through a private sale is usually the first choice when someone thinks about retiring. But even more important is that that current owner has some sort of a succession plan. Unfortunately, these plans, even well-meaning, are not enough to keep the business alive. So this webinar series is designed to help community leaders learn about and evaluate alternative business ownership options. And the intent isn't really to provide you with a manual. Rather, the sessions can help the listeners, compare possible options and then pursue them in more detail using other available sources. Dr. Jarvis Terrell Perry is an adjunct professor in the Plaster Graduate School of Business in the University of Cumberland in Kentucky. He has publications on many topics ranging from succession planning to business ethics. He's a CPA, has a law degree, and has expertise in strategic management and corporate governance. And today, Dr. Curry will speak on the evolution of succession planning, strengths, shortfalls, and innovative paths forward. Before we begin, though, I want to remind participants that please add your questions and comments to the chat box. We will monitor that chat box, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll answer as many questions as time permits. So, Jarvis, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walser. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Thank you all for joining today. We'll go ahead and get started directly into the presentation. So, thank you again for joining. I am Jarvis Tyrell Curry from the University of Cumberland, and I'm actually excited about this. This is a really interesting topic. It's something I really enjoyed talking about, writing about, and communicating with other people. It's a timeless topic, this idea of succession planning. But it's more urgent than ever because there's a pace of business change where we see the technology and everything coming into place. And so the stakes become very high for small, rural, or family owned and corporate organizations. So, really timely topic, very interesting subject area. And I'm glad you're on this journey with me. So, let's go into the agenda. Quick roadmap for you. We'll begin with the rationale for succession planning, and then we're going to trace its historical evolution from medieval guilds to traditional digital age. We're going to explore the strengths and the metrics of rigorous planning. We're going to examine the common shortfalls that some rural or smaller organizations have when they attempt to successfully succession plan. We'll talk about innovative pathways that are enabled by data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, what have you. And from there, we'll discuss stakeholder engagement and building on leadership pipeline. Finally, we'll be turning to adaptability and future directions, which will help us finalize a framework, a roadmap, if you will, with key takeaways that you can go away with you. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to highlight some scholarly research. It's also the full information on the research and the references is available through the article, through the chapter in the book that's been published. But I will give some key takeaways for you to hopefully be able to take a look at those directly. And finally, just with this new planning and this idea of trying to stay ahead of the curve, so to speak, when it comes to succession planning, things are pretty straightforward as far as whether or not a company or organization is going to be successful. But when we talk about who's going to be able to drive that success, that's where things become a little bit more fuzzy. So that's what we'll be exploring today. So the importance of succession planning, it's not optional. Succession planning is not something you can just do only if you want to. It's important. It's imperative. The biggest portion, the biggest challenge for any business is to begin the business. But maybe the second biggest challenge for a business, at least the leadership, is to ensure that the business succeeds and it continues beyond the individuals who created it and began it. So it becomes a strategic imperative. There's formal planning that can ensure organizational continuity and stability. And this is very particularly important for small and family owned firms, which often represent the lifeblood of smaller local communities and economies. Unfortunately, many founders struggle to relinquish that control or neglect or fail to properly groom their successors for the success. And this typically will jeopardize that long term survival of the business. Individuals or heirs or managers, whether the business is exchanging hands throughout a family or within a small group of qualified individuals, it's key to avoid the abrupt transitions. You don't want to have a situation where at the very last minute someone is being named the successor and they're expected to immediately step up and take over the responsibility. You want to start the conversation as early as possible. Plan ahead, plan early. You want to involve those future leaders or the potential leaders in this process. And you want to treat that succession process, that succession planning, as a continuous process rather than a single event. Make sure you're starting early and that you have a plan ahead of this succession planning in order to make sure it goes off without a hitch, so to speak. In a historical context throughout the evolution, kind of helps us to see where our practices have come from. And here we see that with medieval guilds, crafts and trades were often passed down through families. And that emphasized bloodline control and hereditary succession. It wasn't very hard. You knew exactly who was going to succeed you. However, during the Industrial Revolution, organizations became much larger and more formal. However, nepotism was still an informal selection persisted as a process. It's really only in the modern era where many firms are blending family heritage with meritocracy and professional management. There's more of a succession based on the merits, based on the individuals who are contributing to the business and who can take it forward, rather than just the individuals who are part of that bloodline or in some way related to the prior owners or individuals in charge. The understanding of this evolution, it helps show us why rigid one-size-fits-all plans often fail. It's because not enough will copy what's best that's worked in the past. What's worked in the past and has been effective, it needs to be revamped, and that's where we have the idea of ensuring that the people that we're choosing are more worthy than just being a successor in name. Some of the strengths and successes for the metrics that we look at, our research typically shows that a structured succession plan is going to be markedly improved by survival across generations. And without any kind of preparation, roughly about 60% of family businesses have failed beyond the second generation. That's handing it off from the original creators to that second generation. That second generation, unfortunately, is not able to mirror or improve upon the success of the first generation, and that business or that going concern is going to fail potentially at 60% of the time. Conversely, when firms formalize this process, they tend to sustain leadership stability and they maintain financial strength, which is really important. It helps boost stakeholder confidence. And altogether, the leadership stability, the financial strength, and the stakeholder confidence account for key measures that help control the survival rates of the business. It helps the leadership tenure mature, the financial performance improve, innovation capability and stakeholder satisfaction either staying normative or improving over time. And overall, these metrics, they help us evaluate whether our plans are going to be important in delivering real value to the corporation, to our consumers, our clients, to the community, and whether or not it's going to help us succeed with the business and hopefully avoid the pitfalls of potential failures. However, as much as there are strengths in the metrics, there are also shortfalls and challenges. Despite our best intentions, succession plans often fall short. Not fully fail, but they sometimes will fall short. Inadequate grooming leaves successors unprepared for that task that they're being given. They lack the training, they lack the experience. Resistance to that change, to that 10-year change from one successor to another, resistance to that change and entrenched cultures can undermine the new leaders if you don't have the buy-in from the individuals within your organization, staff members, other executive level individuals, board members, even the consumers. In some cases, the clients have say in the culture of a company. And so if you don't have that a buy-in, if there's resistance to that change, it can definitely derail the process. And finally, your plans may also become misaligned with the evolving market conditions. And that happens a lot when you exclude the stakeholders from the process of from these processes of transitioning from one leadership to a different leadership. So I want us to all keep these pitfalls in mind as we move forward. We're going to try to address them one by one as we go through the slides and talk about different areas. Some innovative pathways that have come up. Traditionally, approaches are necessary, but traditional approaches to succession planning are necessary, but they are somewhat inefficient. Emergency practices typically leverage analytics and data platforms. These help to identify high potential talent and track performance. Typically, a successor is going to be available in your rural business, in your going concern. It might be someone who's worked there for a long time. It might be someone who's worked there for a short time, but it took a really good jump in understanding the business and helping it move forward. Predictive analytics, that's artificial intelligence models. They help forecast future workforce needs and they match skills to roles. So while you have these individuals who are working for you, they're working in a certain capacity. And when we're talking about succession planning, we're talking about a major jump from the potential duties that they were doing at one point to the duties that they may be doing at another point. That's where this new AI, the models, the predictive analytics models, can actually help align some of the traits of the leadership that have been successful with your current staff, the individuals who may be potential successors for your business. Succession workshops and collaborative platforms help bring leaders, that's either employees or family members, together, and it helps them co-design this succession plan, a succession plan that you want to make sure you put in place. The scenario planning tools are also going to help us forecast that future workforce needs, like I said before. But more importantly, it's going to bring the innovations to make those successful planning proactive, because the last thing, again, what we want to do is to enact a succession plan in a very short amount of time that doesn't give enough lead up for the successor or the planned succession to be successful. So using these analytical models, they can help us forecast, they can help us better predict, and they can help us get started early in that planning process. Digital transformations and artificial intelligence, or AI. Digital transformation, it's not just the buzzword. I know we've heard it probably be a little bit before here and there. It's really actually reshaping how we develop our leadership and our leaders. Performance management software literally tracks the key competencies and development milestones of individuals within a corporation. This is all that data, all those experiences, and all those duties that are being done by the individuals in your corporation. We can actually track that. We can actually see it in real time and over time, and we can do trends on it. We can see where there's been improvement. We can see where there's been stagnation, and we can see where there may be a trend for future growth and performance. And this could potentially lead to that best possible successor for that business. Predictive analytics typically can pinpoint skill gaps and they can anticipate the next generation of roles. So, where someone isn't as strong in a certain performance, or where there may be an
Come on
additional
in.
role or additional need.
Hey,
Sorry, someone not muted?
hold on a second. Let me just put this.
Thank you. So the digital learning platforms, they have this ability to help us do continuous skill development. The AI and the machine learning (ML), they help us access soft skills objectively, and they remove bias from candidate selection, and that's a big deal right now. You want to try to remove as much bias as possible, because your bias could potentially impact the success of the planning, the success of your successor. If you're not objectively viewing their skills and their ability to lead, their ability to be successful, it could definitely have an impact overall. Collectively, these tools, they help amplify the human judgment factor, that factor that made the business good to begin with. As a leader, you know exactly how to do this stuff, but these tools are helping you reformat your thinking, and they're helping actually improve what you could be doing. They don't replace yourself, they don't replace your thoughts, but they definitely do help in that end. Remember, of course, that we still need leaders with emotional intelligence and strategic insight. So while digital transformation, AI, and machine learning are helpful as a supplement, it's really about the group that gets together to do the planning of succession planning. You have to make sure that you have capable individuals who can do that. Stakeholder engagement and pipeline. Typically, what you're going to find is that if effective succession planning is going to be a team sport. It's where everyone puts their hands together, everyone puts their heads together, and they talk about it and they figure it all out. For the stakeholder engagement, it's recommended to establish what's known as an advisory board, and this involves experienced professionals in the decision-making process. I can't stress the importance of regular meetings to align succession plans with broader corporate visions. It's very important. It should be somewhat formal, somewhat structured, this process, and you want to make sure that you're having the stakeholders engaged. It's also suggested that you use employee surveys or feedback from the employees. It helps refine the leadership development program. It gives you an opportunity to have open communication and build trust. And it also provides an opportunity for outside advisors to come in and mediate any potential conflicts that you may have internally. Basically, you're getting the employees buy-in by getting their understanding and opinion of what needs to happen going forward with the company, what's happening currently, and what's happened in the past. In general terms, employee surveys are generally a good idea, whether you're succession planning or not. On the other end, with leadership pipeline, the research encourages us to identify high potential employees early and give them what's known as stretch assignments. These stretch assignments are rotational or international assignments or larger assignments or complex assignments, something a little bit out of their wheelhouse, but that points towards that larger goal of being a leader of the corporation, of the company, of the going concern. It's really important and it helps prepare for all kinds of potential contingencies. We typically want to see some sort of a mentorship program that's going to link our senior leadership or our outgoing leadership with those potential rising talents, those potential individuals in the company who have been identified through digital analytics, through AI as being high performers and maybe in line for part of that succession planning process. Getting them connected with someone in a mentorship program who can help them bridge that gap, come from that point of being an employee or a leader, and to being that the successor of the leadership for the corporation. You want to make sure that you're investing in that executive education. It's an executive education because, again, we're looking to promote, we're looking to move that individual into that highest possible position where they're leading others. Make sure that you want to make sure that you promote diversity and inclusivity, and also ensure that there's equity in your processes. You want to try to do it as unbiased as possible, whether you're hiring individuals directly for the succession role or you're hiring individuals to work in your corporation and they have a potential to rise to the level of being in that succession process. You want to make sure that the diverse pipeline is not just fair, but it's strategic. It's helping the company while it's also maintaining fairness and objectivity. This is going to improve your overall work environment, and it's going to make the succession planning that much more easier if you don't have to worry about things like diversity, equity, inclusivity, because you've already built it into your processes. Adaptability and future directions. Our succession plans, they have to evolve with the business. That's the thing. They just have to evolve. They cannot stay static. They have to be dynamic, they have to be diverse, and they have to be able to adapt. Scenario planning. Scenario planning is something that helps leaders explore potential future and prepare for contingencies. It helps us to adopt flexible talent strategies, which could include external hiring when specialized skills are required. Sometimes within our business, we grow within our business. However, the growth might be more than can be accommodated by our staff's level of experience or knowledge. And so that's where sometimes we will reach out to consultants for temporary assistance. But the better option, especially when you're considering the building of the business and the improvement of the business with succession planning, would be to hire individuals who have those new skills, those new experiences that will help drive the specialized skills and work forward. When we're trying to develop our internal talent, we want to look at cross-functional assignments and technology programs, which are all equally important. It's going to be a collective effort amongst all of the important areas or all areas of the corporation or the company to ensure that the leaders or the potential leaders are getting exposure to all of these areas. Very important that they understand all areas of the corporation and that they can speak and understand the requirements and the needs of each one. And finally, integrating those digital tools, some that we talked about before, but also fostering that continuous learning identity for the corporation, for those individuals in that leadership pipeline, engaging those stakeholders and emphasizing diversity. This is going to help us future proof our plans. When we look back at our plans, when the board of directors looks at what we did as far as succession, and we're looking a year or 2 years after the succession has occurred, and people are talking and trying to second guess what we've done, it's helpful to have these tools, to have all of this work documented, completed, to show that we took every necessary step to ensure the succession was going to be proper. And that's where we can hopefully provide some cover for our decisions in the future. The one interesting statistic that kind of highlights why adaptability matters is that about only 30% of family firms, smaller firms, are going to survive to the second generation, something we talked about a little bit earlier. So this creates kind of a succession paradox, and it reminds us that the stakes are very high when it comes to planning these successions, and it can't be an afterthought. It cannot be something that you do at the last moment. It cannot be something that you wait for. It cannot be something inherited that you just pass along without having some assurance that the individual or individuals who are taking charge are going to be able to further the business, continue it into the next generation, and further. Some future directions and recommendations. Bringing all these themes together, our recommendations become very, very clear. The first is we need to embrace digital tools, those predictive analytics. They help identify talent and they help make decisions more objective. This is only going to improve your process for future planning for the succession. A second is to engage those stakeholders. Do the advisory boards, do regular meetings, have surveys, have the transparent communications, talk with the employees, talk with the individuals who are investors, talk with the clients. If you have high profile clients, if you have clients that literally dictate the way your business runs, talk to those clients. Who do the clients trust? Who are they looking for? What are they looking for? Make sure that you're having this, but the most communication you can. This is another part of data. Communication can be thought of as data. It is data. And so use that data to your advantage. You're going to have it available to you. So please use it. Make sure you build a robust leadership pipeline. Make sure you spot those high potential workers, and make sure you're providing some sort of mentoring, education, or rotational assignments to make sure you're gearing up those potential uh, leaders for that role of succession. The last thing you'd want to do is have one single individual, one single option for that leadership role, for that succession planning. You want to make sure that you have multiple options if possible, that you have provided these individuals with the training and the understanding, the tools necessary for them to be effective and successful, not just in their current role, but with that future role of being the successor. You got to make sure that it's important for them and that they're getting all the education and need and support that they need. We talked about prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion, unbiased hiring, unbiased training, training on bias, and then inclusive leadership development programs. Again, you just want to make sure that the talent pool is expanded as much as you can. And if you're hiring, or if the plan is to hire from within, that starts with your hiring processes. Make sure you're hiring the people that can then become those potential candidates to be the successor. Start early as early as possible. Use the scenario planning and flexible talent strategies. They help to adapt to certain market changes, things that change. We were talking earlier about how technology just keeps changing, and it's changing at such a major level every day. Essentially, something new is going on, something new is happening. And depending on what kind of business you have, you might be directly affected by this. Your business, what you're doing, your clients, your product, it all might be affected by this high level of change. So understand the new scenarios, understand market entrants, and understand people that are going to be coming to the market, new technology, whether or not the certain platform that you're using is going to still be effective next year, 10 years from now. You want to plan, and this is all part of that succession planning, knowing what that successor is going to have on their plate when they step into it. It's going to help you know what skills that individual needs when they come to that position. Finally, make sure you align your succession plans with any kind of merger or acquisition or regulatory environment. It helps ensure compliance and strategic fit. It's important to note that, especially for a smaller business, a rural business, there's a potential for it to run up against a larger business or a more less rural business, something that's in a larger sector potentially, or any of these different scenarios. There may be a possibility for some of these smaller smaller businesses to merge together, some kind of acquisition or some sort of restructuring. And so these are all things that are potentially on the horizon, and your successor should be someone who can handle that if that's going to be a condition or concern for you. Someone who has the education, the experience, the wherewithal, the social intelligence, emotional intelligence, all these soft skills, communication skills that make it important, that make it helpful when you're doing all this liaising with other businesses, with other clients, with other sectors, what have you. So make sure that if there are any environments or issues coming up or compliance, make sure that your successor or the individuals in that successor pipeline are going to have that best strategic fit. It's going to be important not only for the business, but also for the individuals. You want to make sure that you're setting them up for success and not putting them behind the eight ball, so to speak. So all this leads us to our succession planning framework. To operationalize these ideas, you can consider this six-step framework. First is to assess the readiness, and helps you evaluate your organization's needs and the leadership gaps. So again, we're trying to figure out what the organization is going to need in the next 5 years and where the leadership gaps are. Then you want to identify your candidates, and this is where you spot those high potential successors early, and you broaden that net beyond any kind of family ties by doing strategic hiring or looking beyond just individuals within your bloodline, within your family. Next, you want to develop and train, offer mentoring, executive education, rotational assignments, what have you. You want to build the capabilities of these individuals in that successor pipeline. You want them to be 100% ready to go day one when they take over as a successor. It's, again, a benefit for them and it's a benefit for the corporation. You want the corporation to succeed and you want the individual to succeed. Kind of a win win proposition. Next, you want to formalize governance, and this is where you set clear policies on decision rights. This also includes what happens with inheritance and governance structures. You want to make sure that before you actually start making decisions, before you start the planning, that there are very set policies and procedures that you're going to follow so that once the actual process starts, you don't start making up ideas. You don't start making up the process. You want to go in there very clearly having a defined goal, defined policies, defined process for doing this. Next, you want to go ahead and implement that transition. You want to gradually transfer authority and monitor the progress to ensure continuity. Typically, it doesn't happen where the transfer happens overnight. It typically is something that happens gradually, maybe over a few months, weeks, days, what have you, where there's a sort of a grace period, so to speak. The outgoing successor is going to help or co-manage with the successor until the successor feels 100% or necessary at a certain point to take over. And so that's what we want. We want to make sure the transition is implemented gradually and not on a cutoff basis. You'd want to avoid that as much as possible. And finally, after the succession has taken place, a year after, 2 years after, you want to reassess. You want to look at what happened. You want to update any plans for future successions based on any issues that you may have experienced during this planning process. Planning should be succession planning should be something that is always updated, especially after you've done a a transfer of leadership, and ensure that you're reflecting any strategy or market conditions in your updated succession plan so that it becomes essentially a live document that's continually being updated to keep pace with the changing business or sector in which you work. Now, this framework itself is kind of cyclical. What it does is it encourages a continuous learning and improvement, and it doesn't really advocate for that one-time handover. This is the idea of possibly having successions repeatedly because you want the business to continue in perpetuity, essentially. But that's what the succession plan, the written framework should uh, epitomize. So we're going to get to talk about a bit of the risks and some mitigation for risks. So whenever you do a succession plan, you're going to face some sort of risk, but all of them can be managed in some way. If you have inadequate grooming, the easiest thing to do is to address it by investing in training and mentorship programs. Um, if you're not properly preparing these individuals, just prepare them properly. And that is training, that is mentorship. And you don't have some sort of a standard training or standard membership process. You work with the individual candidate, you work with the successors, you talk to them and see what works best for them, what training works best for them, how they learn best. The mentorship, make sure they're mentoring with someone who they can actually get information from, relate to, have a conversation with. It's important for that individual, the candidate that's coming in as a successor, to be involved in the decisions for the training and for the mentorship. We talked about resistance to change, where you have either the stakeholders or the clients who are resistant to making a change at that level. The best thing you can do is cultivate an adaptive culture and try to communicate the vision clearly. Try to involve all the stakeholders and all the individuals involved in the process and let them know why the succession is needed and what the benefits are going to be. We may have a risk of misaligned objectives, and this is where the plan is not aligned with the business strategy. Simple process, just go back, look at the business strategy, and try your best to align your succession plan with that strategy and set measurable success metrics. Once the transition goes, once the succession happens, have in place some established or some already predetermined metrics that you're going to measure the success of the succession by. Stakeholder exclusion. Um, Make sure you engage both the family and non-family stakeholders early and often. We've talked about this quite a bit already, but it can never be said enough. The stakeholders are the individuals who are important, who have something of value uh, at stake when the succession plannings happen based on the organization, their relationship to the organization. They need to be involved in some way. They need to, their voices need to be heard. So make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're engaging them and make sure you engage them early. Market volatility, try using the scenario planning and flexible talent strategies. They truly do work best. And when they don't work, go back to the drawing board and think of another scenario or look at other ways in which the talents can be best used. So these things work. You just have to make sure you use them. Your implementation roadmap. The thing is, implementation takes time, and it should take time. It should not be a quick process. Typically, you're going to have the implementation over a few years. So this graphic here kind of shows a 4 to 5 years of transition. And you see here 3 years before the plan transition, at T 3 years, you want to assess and plan. We talked about that already. This is the assessing the needs of the organization, starting the strategy, starting the conversation. Then at 2 years, you want to identify those successors, the individuals, the candidates, start mentoring them, start training them, give them all that attention and all the information, scenarios, and what have you. At year 1 year to the transition, make sure you develop and delegate. This is where you'll actually ramp up the development process. You're going to do more training. You're going to do rotational assignments. You're going to do some real life executive examples, things like that. Give them a project to work on that's going to have a direct and real impact on the company. And then on at the actual transition, make sure you have a formal handover, an official statement, official announcements. Again, there's going to be a little bit of overlap between your successors, your initial individual who was leading, and then the successor, but that's going to be expected. That's not a problem, but you do want to have some sort of formal handover where on a specific date, this new individual is effectively the acting or titled individual who is in charge. And then up to 1 year after transition, that's when we do the review and the adjustments. You can review the succession plan, you can adjust it like we just talked about, and make any kind of adaptations that need to be done for future. Uh, and finally, in the conclusion, the key takeaways. Uh, Make sure you understand succession planning. It helps preserve family legacy and organizational continuity. You can preserve a family legacy even if the individual who takes over as a successor isn't a family member. The family legacy is really in the quality of the work and what's being done in the company, and that can survive a succession with a non-family member. Traditional approaches, like I said, they often will struggle. That's the nepotism, poor preparation, and misaligned objectives. So take the time to actually look further than just within the bloodlines within the family for the succession. And we talked about the drops in succession rates. from the different generations. The failures typically happen because the succession planning isn't done properly, isn't done effectively, isn't done with enough thought and care. So make sure you're using the thought and care. Modernize your plan. The data analytics, the artificial intelligence, continuous computer learning, machine learning, all that stuff needs to be considered, thought about. You might not use it all, but at least go through it and see if it's something that could be effective. And as always, make sure diversity, inclusivity, and equity are part of your overall processes and procedures. I would say even before the planning, the succession planning, have it embedded within the organization's culture, hiring practice, etc. And then, as always, make sure you start early and you revisit your succession plans so you can regularly adapt to market dynamics. Really important to make sure you're staying on top of all this stuff. I want to thank everyone for the attention. I actually look forward to any kind of discussion that you might have afterward. And I'd love to hear how you're approaching any succession plannings in your own contexts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jarvis. That was an excellent and a timely presentation. A couple of questions. I don't see many in the chat box yet, but hopefully a few people will be talking about or asking about questions they have. But a couple of things that I was looking at with respect to rural areas. We frequently have a grocery store that maybe has 8 or 10 people in a small town. Sometimes the people working in the grocery store are as old as the operator of the store or the owner of the store. The kids have moved away to college. Do we really have, or are there some good strategies that you would suggest to going out and finding this new investor? Because the store is probably profitable, but it may not be as much profitable or enough profitable to attract outside capital. So just some thoughts on sort of a smaller scale, what kind of things that people can work on?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And I will tell you, the answer is very layered. The truth is, when you have that scenario, that neighborhood store, that small rural store, the staff member's a little bit older, possibly within the generation of that leader, the leadership, and then we're looking for someone to succeed. The best option is going to typically be to have someone who's worked through that store to be the individual to take over. But like you said, if they're all around the same age, are they going to have the capacity? Are they going to have the wherewithal? Are they going to have the desire to take over and continue it into another generation? I think this is what gets to the heart of maybe a lot of these rural matters is who's available in the workforce, and who can actually be brought in. I think this starts with hiring practices. You have to make sure that even when you're in a smaller store like that, you're ensuring that there's going to be a longevity, that there's going to be a pipeline of individuals within that store. And so you do want to hire younger individuals. In order to hire younger individuals, people that are going to be hungry to maybe take over one day, it's going to take outreach. Even in a small community, you can do some outreach. You can go out, you can talk to individuals, students, you can talk to young individuals, young entrepreneurs, individuals who have other possible parallel or competing concerns. You're running the local grocery, but maybe there's someone who's running a hardware store or some or a fruit stand or something similar. Talk to these individuals, make connections with them, talk about their strategy in the future, what they see in the future. And then typically you're going to have some sort of community, neighborhood, business leadership group. And this is great place to reach out. You have individuals who are involved or interested in making policy and ensuring that the businesses within the small community are going according to plan, that they're going great. This might be a great place to hopefully essentially headhunt someone who might want to come in and oversee this process, oversee this small business. So there are a few strategies here. It's not going to be easy, I can tell you, especially with a smaller community. But there is opportunity, there is potential, and you have to look at it individually each time. There's no one size fits all solution for this. But it's a great question. It's a developing question. It's one that's going to probably be a question for a while because there's no clear answer to it. It's just what's going to be the best case in that case.
Talked about a need for training programs for succession and working with students and stuff. Are there some professional or accessible programs for, let's say you're in a relatively small town, it's a grocery store or something where they don't have a lot of capital, but are there easily accessible, maybe online guides to go through the training programs?
Oh, yes, 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 yes. I would say some of your best training programs are going to be in some of the platforms that you might think are least likely to have them. LinkedIn, the social network LinkedIn, professional network, they have an entire learning platform and they have a very robust offerings for succession planning, for mentoring employees into leadership roles. And this is kind of where you're going to be looking for. I would hesitate to say that you're going to find a training that specifically provides mentoring and leadership for an individual who is a staff member in a grocery store in a small rural town and to take over the grocery store and become the leader of the grocery store. I don't know that you will specifically find that training, but you're going to find a training that's going to empower individuals, help them understand what their leadership capabilities are, and help an organization understand what they should be looking for, how they should be engaging with their current staff, how they should be looking out into the local area for hiring, maybe going to high schools, maybe having some sort of a job fair or being involved in an existing job fair, or maybe even getting together with other businesses, local businesses, and creating some sort of job fair. There are more than likely, hopefully, families that are living and growing there, and sometimes the children are leaving, but maybe there's an opportunity to keep those children there, where you can show them that there is incentive, that there is opportunity to grow in that small community and keep that community growing. So yes, there are some platforms online where you can find training. The best training that I would say, typically, especially when you're trying to develop your leaders, is something in house. Being able to identify something that the current owner, the current leader was helpful for them and learning, and hopefully that's something that can be replicated in some sort of formal training. Sometimes it might just be kind of an on-the-job training sort of situation, and that works too. It's kind of getting back to those ideas of apprenticeships or kind of trades where you're literally working with the individual whose job you're essentially going to take over. And I think that's a good thing. It's something that still happens quite a bit. And it's not a lost art. It's just an art that has not been really talked about as much lately because of all the digital and AI and all the computer stuff. But the hands-on experience of actually being around someone who knows the business, it's something you can never replicate. So, a few different responses for you there.
Oh, that's great. I think as we're working with communities periodically, we are seeing more interest really in secondary schools in internship kind of programs. They're not necessarily going back to where we were, let's say in the 60s and 70s, but this area. But I think there's more interest in outreach and perhaps lining a person or a young student up with, like as you say, a person who's in a business and maybe with the hope of having some sort of takeover. But it's in you're working with students, both college level and others. Um, are you seeing more interest by the younger generation in working with, in these capacities like internships and these kinds of things, or do you see, to the extent that you work with rural, are you seeing more of the rural people still looking for sort of the bright lights in the big city, that kind of approach?
I would actually say it's a really good question, and I think it probably deserves a better answer than I'm going to give it. I believe it's kind of both. We still have the individuals who are looking for the bright lights, big cities, trying to move from the rural areas to the more populated metropolis. But we also have a lot of people who are growing up in these large cities, and they're looking for something smaller. They're looking for something more calm, quiet, personable. They're looking for safety. They're looking for individuals that they can grow with, society, neighborhoods, and communities that share values that they have, and they're not finding in these large metropolitans anymore. And so you have an opportunity. There is an opportunity here. I think what's happening, or what needs to happen more, is these smaller businesses, the rural businesses. There's an opportunity to market yourselves a whole lot better. Everything a small let's take the grocery store example for example. Everything that's being done at the grocery store is the exact stuff, same thing that's being done at Facebook, Meta, the same thing that's being done at IBM, at Apple. These huge mega companies, they're buying, they're selling, they're working with wholesalers, they're working with transport, they're working with consumers, they're doing pricing, bundling. That's what you do at a grocery store. They're doing, you're doing taxes, you're doing the books, you're doing all of this stuff. That's what they do at the big places. You're paying salaries, you're accounting for insurance, healthcare. It's all the stuff. The thing about with the smaller businesses, though, these rural businesses, you can get into that business and you can touch every single level of management, every single level of business. It's right there at your hands. Whereas if you go to one of these larger organizations, they're so compartmentalized, you literally can only touch one small area sometimes. So there's a huge benefit. There's a huge benefit to working in these rural communities, working in these rural businesses, these smaller businesses. You have a huge opportunity as an intern, as a student, as a young professional, as an entrepreneur to get a taste of all of business. And that would much more better prepare you to, if you want at some point to do go to the big city and work for one of these large concerns, or you can continue with this small business. You can continue with this rural business that's been going on for several decades, several years, 100 years, that has 100 or 200 years more to go, or who knows? It can be in perpetuity. So I think the answer to the question is a little bit of both, but I think the smaller rural communities and the businesses, they have an advantage, I think, that they're not fully taking advantage of, I would say.
I think your thoughts are really incisive in terms of what technology has really done, particularly since in post-COVID, with Zoom and all the other kind of things. It has really opened the markets in rural. So you now, as national surveys indicate, people would like to live in rural areas, but in the past, maybe they couldn't access health or they couldn't access the services and things they wanted. But now with Zoom, they can work at home and communicate wherever, as we're doing right now. They could get health services better through the internet capacity or AI capacity. We're probably on the verge of driverless cars. It may be in the future that you'll be able to call for a car and have it take you somewhere and bring you home. And all this really enables even older people or people with disabilities, physical disabilities, to to live in a rural area and enjoy the positive benefits. Uh, you mentioned earlier that the businesses don't survive a lot of times in the second and third ownership as a change, especially with family businesses. What can you explain that a little bit more? So why do they tend to peter out over a couple of generations?
Sure. Well, there is research. The research is somewhat limited, but the statistics are there. The first generation of a family business, you gotta think about it in terms of exactly what happens with a family business and how it gets started. It's some person or a couple of people in a family, and they have something that they want to do. They get and they put all their energy and all their effort into it, and it takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort to make it successful. And maybe they involve that second generation in the business at some point. What in what capacity? It depends on the kind of business and how much the originators and the creators are involved in the business. But you have that second generation that the business is at some point turned over to. I think, and I don't know that the research does not support this, but these are my thoughts based on what I've seen. The first generation, they worked very hard to get that thing started, and they understand the value of that hard work and how important it is to keep that going. They build relationships with their customers unlike anything you can imagine, because those customers literally built the business for them. The second generation doesn't have that. The second generation didn't get that opportunity. They didn't get that benefit of building the company. They didn't get the benefit and the full understanding of how important the customer base is. And so while they're trying to do the things that they think are important for the business, unfortunately, the customers, they might not be connecting with the customers as their predecessors did. They may not understand how hard it is to truly run and keep a business like that running. And so I think it's really more than anything, um, It's an attitude, it's an experience process, and it's kind of a thing that does happen with family businesses, unfortunately. We can talk about the market being saturated, we can talk about additional entrance to the market, we can talk about the rising cost of healthcare, employee wages, and all of that, but when it comes to these smaller businesses, it's really about the relationships that you build, and I think with the second generations, this generation's coming in, they haven't had the full experience of building those relationships, and I think that's what happens. I think that's where the failure sometimes comes in.
Okay. I guess maybe to kind of pull this all together, then is it is it ever too early to make known your succession plan or the idea that you're going to retire, for the idea that a fear of losing your customers, or people no longer patronizing your operation or something like that? Is there some hazard of that?
Absolutely. You absolutely, there is a hazard to that. You need to understand your business. You need to understand your customer base. You need to understand your stakeholders. You need to understand your staff members and the potential successors. You need to understand what their tolerance is. In my business, we call it kind of a risk tolerance. In this respect, we might call it a kind of a risk tolerance as well. But you want to make sure you're not making the announcement too early. You don't want this to be going on and on for too long, where people have an anticipation of the succession of the transfer. You do want to have a plan before you start making announcements at all. Make sure you have a plan that works, that's effective, and that represents the actual business and the needs of the business. If you do have a small grocery store, maybe you don't need a 3-year plan. Maybe you do need like a year and a half plan. So but it has to be a plan that makes sense. It has to be a plan that involves the stakeholders and the individuals involved, and it has to be a plan that's going to be successful based on what you know to be true about your business. So, yes, it is possible to do it too early. Definitely possible to do it too late. There is a kind of a Goldilocks middle point that you want to make sure you hit, and it's different for every business. It's different for every sector. It's different for every industry, and it's something you have to figure out based on the needs of your stakeholders.
One of the things that kind of wrap this up now, the sometimes when the people are they own the business and this is their retirement, as they approach retirement, since they need the money and so forth, they basically start disinvesting in the business. So as a result, they don't keep the building up to what it should be, or they don't keep the stock as current as it should be, or cut back the number of stock or something like this. And this can then, I think, as they try to sell it, this causes the new owner to face extraordinary costs to basically bring the business back to where it should be. And what I've seen in some work that I've done in Vermont and other places, where you can then have a community organization that will come in that has access to, let's say, grants and funds and other kinds of money. They're actually maybe even go so far as to buy the building, rehab it, and then resell it to the new owner. And we didn't really talk too much about that community involvement, but it really is a succession planning, it seems to me, is that the community as a whole really has to be involved in it in some way. And it's to keep the clientele, to make sure that the capital stock is up and whatever you needed to do, however way they can help. But I think it's more than, for me, it's more than just the owner deciding to sell the business and take a succession plan. We need a succession plan, but I think it's really a broader take. And just any short comment on that, or otherwise we'll kind of bring this to a conclusion.
No, I actually think that's a pretty good thing. I hadn't really considered that the taking of the resources as someone is exiting as a leader. But yeah, it makes perfect sense. These organizations, if they're coming in and they have that wherewithal to actually improve the property, make it more appropriate for sell and attractive for a potential buyer, I think that's great. Um, yeah, I don't see any problem with that. I think it's a great use of uh, community funds, and it's only going to drive more industry for the community. And hopefully, bring someone in who's going to be kind and thoughtful for that.
Thanks again very much for your insights, and I think the presentation was right on target. So I'll turn it back to Mike, and we will go from there.
Thank you, Norm. On behalf of the University of Illinois Extension, I really want to thank you Dr. Curry, for your presentation today. And thank you, Dr. Walser, for your moderation of the series generally. Appreciate the content, appreciate the effort. And I'm sure our attendees today and the folks who will view this presentation in the future are going to get the same benefit from it. As I mentioned earlier, in that regard, if you registered for the webinar, you'll receive presentation materials and a link to the recording in a follow-up email. If you're not already receiving our email notices about upcoming webinar offerings, please drop your email into the chat before you go, and we'll add you to our local government education series email list. The next program in the Rural Business Transitions series will be on Tuesday, April 7th, 2 weeks. We're doing it every 2 weeks, again at high noon, and it's going to be on succession through shared ownership, exploring employee stock ownership programs and employee-led transitions. I'd also like to invite you, as always, to visit go.illinois.edu/LGE to access our video archives from prior presentations on a wide variety of community development and economic development topics. So, thank you all for attending today's webinar. Have a great day, and we hope to see you back for future presentations. Thank you.